She hopped into my cab on a Monday afternoon, clutching a beat-up backpack in one hand and a tablet in the other, with a tired look in her eyes, but a smile that didn't quite match her simple clothes. I have been driving a taxi in New York for 20 years, and I have seen everything in this back seat. Executives crying after getting laid off, couples fighting before signing divorce papers, immigrants fresh off the boat with fear in their eyes and hope in their suitcases. But when Carolina asked to go to the financial district and mentioned a meeting with investors, I thought she was someone's assistant, maybe a secretary taking documents to her boss. That is, until she distractedly swiped the screen of her tablet, and I saw through the rearview mirror the Business Insider headline open on the screen. Ex-housewife sells delivery startup for $15 million after being abandoned with 3 kids. The face in the photo was hers, Carolina Torres, 42 years old, a Latina immigrant, and in that moment, I knew I was about to hear a story you don't easily forget. During that 40-minute ride across Manhattan, she told me every detail of how she turned a pressure cooker into an empire that rivaled giants of the industry, and how the ex-husband who called her useless tried to sue her for half the fortune he never helped build. It wasn't a story of luck. It wasn't a story of family inheritance. And it wasn't a story of a millionaire investor who appeared out of nowhere. It was the story of a woman who woke up one day with her name on nothing, no bank account, no career, no plan B, with 3 kids looking at her expecting food on the table, and decided that being abandoned didn't mean being defeated. And what she did in the 5 years that followed proved something Wall Street hates to admit. You don't need an MBA, you don't need 6 figures of startup capital, and you don't need the right connections. You need to solve a real problem for real people better than anyone else. And Carolina did exactly that. On the first block after she got in, Carolina broke the silence the way people with heavy histories always do. Straight to the point, no beating around the bush, as if she had rehearsed it 1,000 times in her head, but never said it out loud. She adjusted that worn-out backpack on her lap, looked at the tablet as if checking if the story was really real, and let it out. 8 years ago, I was making dinner for my kids when my husband came home early from work. I thought it was strange because he never arrived before 9. Her voice came out steady, but you could tell that firmness had been built brick by brick on top of a lot of cracked ground. I adjusted the rear-view mirror to see her face better while she talked, and she continued. Marco sat at the kitchen table, didn't even take off his jacket, and spoke like someone canceling a cable TV subscription. Carolina said he looked at her with that empty expression of someone who made a decision a long time ago and is just following protocol. The kids were in the living room watching cartoons. Sophia was 8, Diego was 5, and Isabella was 2. The smell of roasted chicken was still in the air. The table set for 4 people. Napkins folded the way she always did. And it was right there, between the stove and the fridge, that Marcos dropped the sentence that blew everything up. "I don't love you anymore, Carolina. I met someone else. I'm moving in with her. You figure it out." She repeated his words slowly, as if she were still processing the absurdity of it, and said, "He didn't ask if I was going to be okay, didn't ask about the kids, didn't explain anything. He just stood up, grabbed a suitcase that was already packed in the car, and left." The door slammed, and I stood there holding a wooden spoon, listening to Peppa Pig on the TV. In the days that followed, Carolina discovered the nightmare was bigger than she imagined. She told me she went to the bank to try to withdraw cash and found out the joint account had been drained. She went to the leasing office and found out the apartment lease was only in his name. The car? His name. The kids' health insurance? His name. Even the electric bill was in his name. She had spent 10 years married, taking care of the house, raising children, and on paper, she didn't exist. "I realized," she said, looking out the taxi window as we passed a traffic light, "that I had become invisible in a way even I hadn't noticed. I didn't have a separate bank account. I didn't have my own credit card. I had nothing to prove I existed other than the birth certificates of the children with my name listed as mother." She tried calling Marcos in the following days, sent texts, emails, asking for at least the child support. He blocked her number. His mother, the mother-in-law who was always cold, called once just to say that her son wasn't going to support a woman who didn't know how to keep a husband. Carolina stayed there, alone, with 3 small kids, no income, no support network, not knowing where to even start. When she finished telling this part, her voice cracked a little, and she wiped the corner of her eye quickly, like someone who doesn't want anyone to notice. I slowed down the taxi, waited for a bus to pass, and said, looking in the rearview mirror, "Carolina, when someone takes away your external security, you discover what you have inside that nobody can take away. And usually, that is exactly where the turnaround begins. Not because you want it to, but because you have no other choice." She let out a long sigh, squeezed the strap of her backpack, and nodded. "That was exactly it," she said softly. Then she started recounting the first 30 days after he left, and how each day seemed worse than the one before, until reaching a point where she thought she wouldn't be able to go on. Carolina adjusted her posture in the seat and continued, now with a more controlled voice, as if she had learned to narrate that part without letting the pain spill over. She said that in the first 30 days after Marcos left, reality hit like a punch to the gut, one after another, without giving her time to breathe. His calls went straight to voicemail, texts were left on read, and the child support he promised to settle later never arrived. Carolina had $150 in her wallet, a credit card with a $500 limit, and 3 kids who needed to eat, go to school, shower, and sleep with the lights on and the heater running. "I made a spreadsheet in a notebook," she said, controlling every penny as if it were the last resource for survival, because it was exactly that. The first time the card was declined at the supermarket, Carolina was with the 3 kids. She had filled the cart with the basics: rice, beans, frozen chicken, milk, diapers for Isabella. She put everything on the belt. The cashier scanned the products, gave the total, $183. Carolina swiped the card. The machine beeped, and the screen showed declined. She tried again, same thing. Asked to run it as credit, declined. The line behind her started to grow, people looking with that mixture of pity and impatience. Sophia, the oldest, pulled her sleeve and asked quietly, "Mommy, are we going to be poor?" Carolina said she felt her legs go weak, but she took a deep breath, smiled at her daughter and said, "No, sweetie, we're just going to take fewer things today." She left half the groceries at the register and walked out with the kids, feeling everyone's eyes burning into her back. In the following weeks, Carolina tried to find a formal job. She printed a resume at a local print shop, paid $2 to have the paper in her hand, and went out knocking on doors at stores, restaurants, offices. The answer was always the same, with different words but the same meaning. "You have been out of the workforce for 10 years. We have no openings." Or, "You have 3 small kids? And who is going to take care of them if you work here?" Or even, "We need someone with recent experience." She told me a clothing store manager was actually too honest. "Look, honey, I understand your situation, but we need people who can work overtime, work weekends, and you with 3 small kids. It's complicated." Carolina left that interview and sat on a park bench, looking at the resume in her hand, and for the first time understood that the system punishes those who choose to care for people. She came home every day empty-handed, made up excuses not to eat lunch saying she had eaten out, but saved the food to ensure the kids had enough. Diego, 5 years old, started asking when his dad was coming back. Isabella, too, cried in the middle of the night calling for daddy. And Sophia, the oldest, got too quiet, the kind of silence only a child has when they are trying to protect their mother from more worry. Carolina said one night, after putting the 3 of them to sleep, she locked the bathroom door, sat on the cold floor of the shower, and cried until she had no more tears. I thought, am I going to make it? Would it be better if they stayed with someone who can give them a better life? I slowed down around 5th Avenue. Traffic was gridlocked, and I took the chance to turn my face slightly toward her. "Carolina," I spoke slowly, choosing every word, "the system is designed to punish those who chose to care for people instead of caring for a resume. But here is the truth nobody tells you. The same skills you used to keep 3 kids alive, fed, and emotionally stable while everything was falling apart are exactly the skills that build a company. Crisis management, prioritization with 0 resources, emotional resilience. That isn't on LinkedIn, but it's worth more than an MBA." She looked at me in the rearview mirror, eyes still red from remembering those days, and nodded slowly. Then she continued telling how the judgment of the people around her made everything even worse, and how the shame almost paralyzed her completely. Carolina stared out the window as the taxi crossed the bridge, and her voice gained a different weight when she started talking about the following weeks. She said the worst wasn't the lack of money, even though that was terrible. The worst was the isolation that came with it, as if she had become radioactive overnight. Her mother-in-law called a week after Marcos left, not to ask how the kids were, not to offer help, but to spit poison. "Carolina, you didn't know how to keep my son. A man doesn't leave home without a reason. You must have done something wrong." And she hung up. Carolina said she stood there holding the phone, mouth open, unable to believe she had heard that. "For 10 years, I treated that woman with respect, took the kids to her house every Sunday, endured comments about my cooking, how I raised the kids, how I dressed. And when I needed her, she blamed me. Her own sister, who lived in another state, called offering help but seasoned with judgment. I warned you not to depend on a man, Carolina. I told you to go to college, to work, to have your own money. But you wanted to be the perfect little housewife, and look where that got you." Carolina said she thanked her for the help, refused the money her sister offered because she knew it would come with too high of an emotional bill, and hung up feeling shame burn inside. Her friends from church, who used to call every week to schedule lunch, vanished like smoke. Some blocked her on WhatsApp. Others simply stopped replying to messages. "I think," Carolina said softly, "they were afraid that what happened to me was contagious, as if divorce was a disease you could catch." Carolina started avoiding places where she might run into acquaintances. She changed supermarkets, stopped going to church, stopped taking the kids to the neighborhood playground. She cried hiding in the bathroom while the kids slept, biting a towel so she wouldn't make noise, because she didn't want Sophia to wake up and see. "I felt," she said, "like I had failed at everything. As a mother, as a wife, as a woman, as a human being. And the worst is that part of me believed what they said, that I was useless, that I didn't know how to do anything, that I wasn't worth anything beyond cooking and cleaning." Her voice trembled at this part, and she stopped talking for a few seconds, just watching the city lights pass by the window. It was on one of those afternoons of silent desperation that a neighbor, Mrs. Lucia, a 70-year-old Puerto Rican lady who lived in the same building, knocked on the door. She had brought an empty Tupperware container and said, "Carolina, I came to return this and thank you. Do you remember that meal you brought when my husband was sick? He ate everything. Said it was the best food he had eaten in months. Your meals were always the best at the church potlucks." Everyone commented on it. Carolina thanked her, confused by the compliment in the middle of so much chaos. But Mrs. Lucia continued, "You should sell these meals, honey. There are so many people in this neighborhood who work 12 hours a day and don't have time to cook. You have a gift. Don't waste it." And she left, leaving Carolina standing in the doorway, holding the empty Tupperware as if it were the first time someone saw value in something she did. I slowed down because traffic jammed up again and used the moment to turn to the back seat and speak directly to her. "Carolina, talent that nobody values doesn't mean it's worth nothing. It means you are in the wrong market, offering to the wrong audience. Your mother-in-law was never going to see value in what you did because she needed to diminish you to justify her son. Your sister was never going to value it because she had chosen a different path and needed to prove hers was better. But Mrs. Lucia," she saw the obvious that was right in front of everyone, "you solved a real problem with a real skill." Carolina wiped the corner of her eye, smiled for the first time since getting into the taxi, and said, "It was exactly what Mrs. Lucia said. That gave me the idea to try something. But before trying, I needed to hit rock bottom for real." Carolina took a deep breath and continued the story, now reaching the part she said she never told anyone because it still hurt too much. She said that 2 weeks after the conversation with Mrs. Lucia, while she was still processing the idea of maybe selling meals, a yellow envelope appeared under the door. Eviction notice. 15 days to vacate the apartment due to non-payment. Marcos had stopped paying the rent 3 months before leaving the house, and the landlord had run out of patience. Carolina read that paper sitting on the hallway floor with the kids still sleeping in the bedrooms, and felt the floor disappear from under her feet. I thought, where do I go? How do I go? With what money do I rent another place if I can't even pay for this one? Her voice cracked, and she stopped speaking for a few seconds, just looking at her own hands. On the same day as the eviction notice, Isabella, the youngest at 2 years old, woke up with a high fever. Carolina picked up the girl, felt the heat burning on her forehead, and knew she needed a doctor. But she had no health insurance, no money for a private visit, and the nearest public hospital emergency room was across town. She wrapped Isabella in a blanket, asked Sophia to watch Diego, and ran out to catch a bus. She spent 6 hours in the waiting room of the public hospital, holding her daughter who was crying in pain, surrounded by people in the same desperate situation. When she was finally seen, the doctor prescribed an antibiotic that cost $42 at the pharmacy. Carolina had $23 in her wallet. She asked the pharmacist if she could buy half the box, if she could pay in installments, if there was a cheaper generic. The lady looked at her with pity and said no. Carolina said she left that pharmacy holding Isabella, sat on a park bench, and for the first time seriously thought about giving up. I looked at my sick daughter, without medicine, without health insurance, without a home in 2 weeks, and thought, wouldn't they be better off with another family? Am I not being selfish by insisting? Wouldn't a real mother hand her children over to someone who can give them what I can't? She said this looking straight at me through the rearview mirror, eyes full of tears she wouldn't let fall, as if she needed someone to understand that this wasn't weakness, it was honest desperation. I called social services that day. I picked up the phone, dialed the number, and when the lady answered, I froze. I couldn't speak. I hung up. When she got home that night, the kids had already eaten the leftover rice and eggs that Sophia, at 8 years old, had prepared herself. Carolina laid Isabella on the sofa, covered her with a blanket, and went to the kitchen to try to think of a solution. That was when she saw the pressure cooker on the stove, that old dented pot she had gotten from her mother when she got married. She had made food in that pot for 10 years, fed Marcos, fed the kids, fed guests, fed half the world. The pot never failed, and it was looking at that pressure cooker that Carolina had the click. If this pot fed me for years, it can feed others too. And if other people pay for what comes out of this pot, I pay for medicine, I pay rent, I pay for everything. She said at that moment she didn't have an elaborated plan, didn't have a strategy, didn't have anything other than desperation transformed into a decision. I stopped the taxi at a red light, turned completely to the back seat, and spoke looking straight into her eyes. Carolina, there is a moment in the life of anyone who builds something real where they reach a point where they have nothing left to lose. And it is exactly there, at that point, that you discover you always had everything to gain. Because when you are no longer afraid of losing, you take real risks. You don't risk with insurance, with a plan B, with a safety net. You risk everything because everything is already gone anyway. Carolina let out a tired smile, wiped her face with the back of her hand, and said, that was exactly it. The next day, I woke up at 5 in the morning and started cooking, and it was that first meal that changed everything. Carolina's voice took on a different tone when she reached this part of the story, as if she had finally arrived at the moment where the fall began to turn into a climb. She said the day after that night, looking at the pressure cooker, she woke up at 5 in the morning before the kids, opened the fridge, and took inventory of what she had. 2 onions, 3 tomatoes, half a kilo of chicken that was at the bottom of the freezer, rice, beans, basic spices. $50 was all that was left on the card. She put on her coat, went down to the corner bodega that opened early, and bought what she could. More chicken, vegetables on sale, the cheapest kind of aluminum to-go containers. She went back home carrying the bags as if she were transporting gold, because that was exactly what it represented. I had calculated, she said, that I could make 10 meals with that investment. 10 meals to try to save 3 lives. While the kids were still sleeping, Carolina cooked like she had never cooked before. It wasn't just food, it was a bet. Chicken seasoned with garlic, lime, and paprika, roasted until the skin was crispy. Fluffy rice with diced carrots and corn. Beans with smoked bacon and bay leaf. Salad with tomato, lettuce, and homemade pickled red onions. She assembled each container as if it were for a customer at an expensive restaurant, dividing the portions with care, wiping the edges of the aluminum with a paper towel, placing everything with pride. When she finished, it was 9:30 in the morning, and she had 10 meals ready lined up on the kitchen table. She took a sheet of paper, a marker Sophia used for drawing, and wrote by hand, "Homemade Latina food, $8. Free delivery in the neighborhood. Carolina's kitchen," with her phone number at the bottom. She took a photo with her old cell phone and posted it in 3 neighborhood groups on Facebook. The first reply arrived 20 minutes later. A nurse named Jennifer, who lived 3 blocks away, sent a message. "Do you deliver today? I'm working a double shift and don't have time to cook. Can you bring one?" Carolina replied instantly, grabbed the meal still hot, put it in a small bag with a napkin and plastic cutlery, and practically ran out. She rang the doorbell of Jennifer's apartment, a black woman in her 40s wearing blue scrubs and looking exhausted. Jennifer took the meal, paid with a $10 bill, and told her to keep the change. She opened it right there in the doorway, smelled it, and let out, "My God, it's been a long time since I smelled real food." Carolina went back home with $10 in her hand and her heart beating like she had won the lottery. By the end of that day, she had sold 8 of the 10 meals, $80. More money than she had seen together in weeks. The next day, Jennifer messaged again. "Can you make 5 a week for me? Monday to Friday?" And more. "My colleagues at the hospital asked if you make them for them too. There are 3 more interested." Carolina said she looked at that message and realized something she had never noticed before. She wasn't selling food. She was selling time, care, a solution to a real problem. Nurses working 12 hours straight didn't have energy to cook. People working 2 jobs didn't have time to go to the market. Single moms like her needed food that really nourished without needing a stove. "I hadn't thought about this strategically," Carolina said, "but when I saw there was demand, I understood that maybe this could be more than desperation. It could be a beginning." The taxi passed a restaurant with a line out the door, and I took the chance to point out the window and say, "Carolina, you see that restaurant there? Charges $25 a plate. And do you know what they sell? The same thing as you, time and care. People don't buy food, they buy time they don't have and care nobody else gives. You were selling both things for $8 and doing it better than most because you cooked like a mother, not like a business. That is a competitive advantage that business school doesn't teach." Carolina smiled, and for the first time since she got in the taxi, the smile seemed complete. "That was exactly what I discovered in the 2nd week," she said. "And that was when I realized I needed to treat it like a real operation, not like temporary desperation." Carolina leaned forward a bit in the seat, and her energy changed when she started talking about the 2nd week. She said after selling the first meals and seeing there was real demand, she stayed up late Sunday night doing something she had never done in her life: strategic planning. She took one of Sophia's old notebooks, drew columns with a ruler, and created a tracking system. Column 1, customer name. Column 2, address. Column 3, orders for the week. Column 4, dietary preferences. Column 5, amount paid. "I didn't know I was making a basic CRM," she said, laughing for the first time since getting in the taxi. "I just knew that if I was going to grow, I needed organization. Otherwise, I would lose orders, forget deliveries, mix up customers, and then it would all end before it started." On her phone, Carolina downloaded a free cost control spreadsheet she found on YouTube. She watched the tutorial on how to fill it out 3 times, pausing and rewinding, writing everything down in the notebook. She calculated how much each meal cost: chicken, rice, beans, vegetables, packaging, gas, water, even the plastic bag went into the account. She discovered that each meal cost $3.20 to produce. She sold it for $8. Net profit, $4.80 per unit. When I saw that number, she told me, I understood that if I did volume, I could live off this. I wasn't going to get rich, but I could pay rent, food, medicine. I could survive with dignity. So she did something desperate people rarely do. She invested the entire profit from the first week back into the business. Carolina took the $80 she had made, plus $60 she still had saved, and went to a wholesale packaging supplier she found on the internet. She bought 100 aluminum containers with lids for half the price she paid at the bodega. She negotiated with the owner, an older Chinese man who barely spoke English, showing him the order notebook and explaining that she was going to grow, that she would be back. He gave a discount and threw in 50 extra lids as a bonus. On the way home, she stopped at a stationery store, bought sheets of adhesive labels and a gold marker. That night, she called Sophia, her 8-year-old daughter, and the two sat at the kitchen table sticking handwritten labels on each container. Carolina's kitchen, made with love, food that hugs. Sophia drew a little heart on each one. My 8-year-old daughter, Carolina said with a choked-up voice, was my first partner without knowing it. In the second week of operation, Carolina woke up at 4 in the morning, cooked until 7, woke the kids, took them to school, came back, assembled the meals, went out to deliver by bus and on foot, came back, cleaned the kitchen, picked up the kids, helped with homework, and started over. She slept 5 hours a night, had blisters on her feet from walking so much. Her hands smelled permanently of garlic and onions. But the numbers didn't lie. 40 meals a day, profit of $120 clear. By the end of the second week, she had $600. She paid the overdue rent, bought medicine for Isabella, filled the fridge for the first time in months. I sat on the kitchen floor that night, she said after the kids were asleep, and cried. But it wasn't crying from despair. It was crying from relief. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't afraid of the next day. I took advantage of the traffic easing up a bit and spoke, keeping my eyes on the avenue but with a firm voice so she could hear well. Carolina, the difference between a side hustle and a business isn't size, it's method. A side hustle is waking up every day not knowing how much you're going to make, without control, without predictability. A business is having a system that works even when you are tired, even when life gets tough. You created a method with a notebook and a phone spreadsheet. There are tech companies that raise $1 million and have no method at all. She smiled, adjusted the backpack on her lap and said, "Exactly. But I was still alone, and alone has a limit. That was when I met 2 women who changed everything again." Carolina adjusted the backpack strap and continued telling the story, now with a different sparkle in her eyes, as if this part of the story brought back good memories in the middle of so much struggle. She said at the end of the third week, when she was already making 40 meals a day, she reached a physical limit impossible to cross alone. She woke up at 4 in the morning, cooked until she couldn't stand up anymore, and even then, there were people asking whom she couldn't serve. It was on one of those days, carrying bags of meals to the bus stop, that she literally bumped into 2 women sitting on a park bench. One was Venezuelan, Rosa, 30-something, hair in a tight bun, tired look of someone with a heavy story to tell. The other was Dominican, Mariana, older, about 45, with 4 kids and no steady job. The 2 were talking about how hard it was to find work, about how they needed money but nobody hired immigrants without regularized papers. Carolina stopped, looked at the 2, and in a decision she herself said she doesn't know where it came from, sat on the bench and blurted out, "Do you guys know how to cook?" Rosa and Mariana looked at each other, confused by the question coming from a stranger with bags full of food containers. "Of course we know," Rosa replied. "Why?" Carolina opened the bag, showed the meals, and quickly told them what she was doing, selling homemade food, earning $8 a unit, but she had reached the limit of what she could produce alone. Then she made a proposal that surprised even herself. "What if you cooked in your houses? I sold and delivered, and we split the profit. I pay $4 per ready meal. You make as many as you can. I take care of the rest." The silence that followed lasted about 5 seconds, but seemed eternal. Mariana was the first to break the silence and came with the obvious question, the same one anyone who has been exploited would ask. "And what if you don't pay? How do we know we can trust you?" Carolina understood the distrust perfectly. Immigrant women alone, without a legal safety net, had already been tricked 1,000 times by people promising work and disappearing with the payment. So she did something simple but powerful. She opened the tracking notebook, showed the cost spreadsheet on her phone, and explained everything. How much it cost to produce, how much she sold it for, how much was left over, how much she needed to pay her bills, how much she could share. I treat you as partners, not as employees, Carolina said, looking into their eyes. Because I know alone I won't go far, but together we can build something that supports 3 families. Rosa and Mariana agreed to do a test run. Each took ingredients Carolina bought, cooked 10 meals at home following the recipes Carolina provided, and brought them the next day. Carolina tasted, approved, sold everything in 2 hours, and came back the same day with the $40 for each of them in separate envelopes, plus a handwritten receipt. They looked at me, Carolina said, as if I were an alien, because nobody ever had treated them with respect like that. Nobody had given a receipt. Nobody had paid on the day. Nobody had called them partners. From that day on, the 3 became a team. Carolina handled sales, word-of-mouth marketing, deliveries, financial control. Rosa and Mariana cooked, each specializing in different dishes. In 2 weeks, they were producing 100 meals a day. In a month, 150. I slowed down because the light turned red and took the chance to turn to the back seat. Carolina, do you know what you did there? You created a cooperative model of distributed production before knowing that had a name in business school. More importantly, you understood that an empire isn't built alone. It's built with people who are in the same fight as you. Rosa and Mariana weren't employees, they were allies. And an ally fights alongside you because they know if you win, they win too. Carolina nodded, took a deep breath, and said, "It was exactly that partnership that allowed the next step, because when you have a team, you can do things that are impossible alone." And that was when the first corporate client appeared. Carolina's voice gained a faster rhythm when she reached this part, as if she were reliving the moment things started to scale for real. She said with Rosa and Mariana on the team, she managed to have time to think about strategy instead of just putting out fires. That was when she created something that seemed silly but made a huge difference. A loyalty program made in a notebook. For every 10 meals bought, the 11th was free. She stamped a simple paper card with a stamp she bought for $2 at a stationery store, and customers guarded it like it was a platinum credit card. People loved it, she said, not because they wanted free food, but because they felt someone was paying attention to them, that they mattered beyond the money they paid. But what really differentiated Carolina was the preference notebook. Every time she delivered a meal, she asked, "Was it good? Is there something you don't like? Do you want more of anything?" And she wrote it all down. Joan didn't like cilantro. Maria was vegetarian. Roberto needed low-salt food because of high blood pressure. Teresa loved extra hot sauce. Anna wanted a double portion of protein because she went to the gym. No restaurant in the neighborhood did that. No fast food chain asked. But Carolina did, because to her every client wasn't a number. It was a person with a name, a history, a preference. I treated them, she explained, the way I would like to be treated, with real attention, not with the automatic smile of a trained attendant. It was this personalized care that caught the attention of Stephen, an HR manager at an accounting firm in Midtown. He had bought a meal once on the recommendation of Jennifer, the nurse who was Carolina's first customer. Stephen liked it so much he started ordering every week. One day he called and made a proposal Carolina almost didn't believe. "My company has 50 employees. Most eat fast food every day because they don't have time to go out for lunch. Can you make 50 meals a day for us? I'll sign a monthly contract, guaranteed payment every week." Carolina said she went mute on the other end of the line for about 3 seconds, processing what she just heard. 50 meals a day, 5 days a week, 250 meals a week at $8 each. $2,000 a week, $8,000 a month, from just one client. Her first thought was, I can't do it. Even with Rosa and Mariana, producing 50 meals every day, keeping the quality she promised seemed impossible. But the second thought was, if I refuse, someone else will accept and I lose the chance to grow for real. So she replied to Stephen, "I can do it. Give me a week to organize the operation and I start the following Monday." She hung up the phone, sat on the kitchen chair, and stared at the ceiling thinking, how am I going to do this? That was when she called Rosa and Mariana, put coffee on the table, opened the notebook, and the three held a 3-hour strategic meeting. They divided tasks. Rosa cooked in the morning, Mariana in the afternoon, Carolina handled purchasing, logistics, quality control, and delivery. They tested for 3 days before starting the contract, and it worked. When the taxi stopped at a light, I turned to the back seat because I needed to name what she had done without knowing. Carolina, you want to know what's ironic? Tech companies spend billions of dollars trying to create an algorithm that remembers the customer, that personalizes the experience, that makes people feel seen. They call it artificial intelligence, machine learning, big data. But you did all that naturally, with a $2 notebook and real attention. You created a human algorithm. And a human algorithm always beats a computer algorithm when it comes to care. Carolina smiled, wiped the corner of her eye, and said, "Exactly." But growth brought a new problem I had never imagined: how to scale without losing the soul of the business. And that was when I met someone who changed everything again. Carolina leaned forward, eyes brighter now, and started telling about the day that completely changed the scale of the business. She said 6 months after starting the corporate contract with Steven's office, a client suggested she create an app. "You should put this on an app, Carolina. I wanted to order food from home, but I always forget to text you on WhatsApp. If there was an app, I'd click and that's it." Carolina heard that and thought, app. She barely knew how to use a computer beyond a basic spreadsheet, let alone create an app, but the idea stuck in her head. A week later, she went to a community event for immigrant entrepreneurs organized by the neighborhood church. And it was there she met Raj, a 28-year-old Indian developer who had been a software engineer in Bangalore and was trying to restart his life in New York. Raj was sitting alone in a corner, working on his laptop, and Carolina approached somewhat awkwardly. She told him about the meal business, about the customers, about the app suggestion, and asked how much it would cost to make something simple. Raj listened to everything, asked a few questions about how many customers she had, how much she billed per month, if she had a plan to grow. Carolina answered everything with honesty. 300 customers, $12,000 a month in revenue, and a dream to grow but no capital to invest. Raj stayed silent for a few seconds, closed his laptop, and said something Carolina never expected. "I'll build the app for you. I won't charge anything now. You give me 5% of the company. If you grow, I grow with you. If it sinks, I waste my time. But I believe in your business." Carolina said she felt like hugging that guy right there. For 3 months, Raj developed the basic app in his spare time. Nothing sophisticated, nothing with artificial intelligence or cutting-edge technology, but functional. Weekly menu, order button, history of preferences, integrated payment, delivery notification. Carolina tested it with 10 customers first, fixed the bugs, improved the interface with real feedback. When she launched officially, she sent a message to the entire base of 300 customers announcing, "Carolina's Kitchen now has an app. Download it in the store, place your order with 1 click, and we deliver at the time you choose." In 1 week, 200 customers had downloaded it. In 2 weeks, revenue increased 30% because people who forgot to order now had the ease of remembering. Carolina looked at the numbers and realized she had gone from a desperate cook to a businesswoman with a scalable operation. But it was exactly when things started going well that the past knocked on the door. Marcos, the ex-husband who had disappeared, who didn't pay child support, who had blocked her number, appeared. He sent a message on WhatsApp. "Carolina, heard you're doing well with this food business. We need to talk. Can we grab coffee?" She read that message 3 times, felt her stomach turn, and showed it to Rosa and Mariana. The two said instantly, "Don't go. That man doesn't want your well-being, he wants your money." But Carolina knew if she didn't go, he would show up another way. She set a meeting at a public cafe, took Mariana along as a witness, and went. Marcos arrived in a suit, fake smile, that salesman charm she knew so well. He started with a compliment. "You look beautiful, Carolina, and what pride seeing you being an entrepreneur." But soon came the real motive. "Look, technically we are still married on paper, and the business started during the marriage. I talked to a lawyer and he said half is mine. I slammed the brakes of the taxi suddenly because a cyclist cut in front and used the scare to turn to the back seat and speak with a firm voice. Carolina, success attracts two things: real opportunity and parasites disguised as opportunity. Real opportunity comes from people like Raj, who risk with you, who put skin in the game, who build with you. Parasites come from people like Marcos, who disappeared when you were at rock bottom but reappear when they smell money. The trick is to differentiate quickly and cut the parasite before it sucks everything dry. Carolina took a deep breath, nodded, and said, "That was exactly what I had to do." And what came next was the biggest fight of my life. Carolina stared out the window, fingers gripping the backpack strap, and continued telling the story with a tenser voice now, as if reliving every second of that nightmare. She said 2 weeks after that coffee, a court summons arrived in the mail. Marcos had hired a lawyer and filed a lawsuit asking for half the business. The argument was simple and cruel. They were still legally married on paper. The business had started during the marriage, therefore 50% was his by marital right. Carolina read that document sitting in the kitchen, hands shaking, and felt the floor disappear again. I thought, it's not possible. This man abandoned me, left me with nothing, vanished when I needed him most, and now wants half of what I built alone with my hands, with my sweat. She called Rosa and Mariana in a panic. The three gathered at Mariana's house and stayed until dawn trying to understand what to do. It was Mariana, who knew a lawyer, Elena Rodriguez, who did pro bono work for immigrant women in vulnerable situations. Carolina made an appointment, brought all the documents she had, tracking notebook from day one, screenshots of messages, proof that Marcos never contributed a cent, witnesses who could confirm he had abandoned the family. Elena listened to everything, reviewed the papers, and spoke with that frankness only an experienced lawyer has. Carolina, legally, he doesn't have a strong case. The business started after he abandoned you, with money you got alone, in an operation he never participated in. But he will try to scare you, will drag out the process, will make you spend money and energy hoping you get tired and accept a settlement. It is an intimidation strategy. Carolina asked what she should do. Elena replied, "We counterattack, and we investigate him." The investigation Elena requested revealed something Carolina never expected. Marcos had embezzled the child support for 2 years. He declared on his tax return that he paid regular support for the 3 kids, deducted the amount to pay less tax, but never transferred a single cent. It was documented tax fraud. Furthermore, he had opened a bank account in Sophia's name, the oldest daughter, without Carolina's authorization, and deposited small amounts there to pretend he was fulfilling his obligation while using it as false proof. Elena gathered everything, prepared a countersuit, and even notified the IRS about the fraud. Carolina said when she received the news, she didn't feel joy, didn't feel revenge, felt only profound exhaustion. "I didn't want to destroy him," she said. "I just wanted him to stop trying to destroy me." The lawsuit turned into a nightmare that lasted 4 months. Hearings, depositions, documents, every trip to the courthouse meant closing the kitchen for a day, losing revenue, spending emotional energy she didn't have to spare. Marcos tried to play dirty, spread rumors to her customers that the food was made without a health permit, that she didn't pay taxes, that it was an illegal operation. Some customers left out of fear, but most stayed, because trust built over months doesn't vanish with a resentful ex-husband's rumor. Elena worked for free. Rosa and Mariana cooked double to make up for the days Carolina couldn't work, and the Latino community in the neighborhood mobilized, raising money to help with legal costs. "It was then," Carolina said with a choked-up voice, "that I understood family isn't who shares your blood, it's who stands by your side when you bleed. I reduced speed because traffic started to tighten again, and took the chance to say what was clear since she started telling this part. Carolina, people who built nothing always think they have a right to what others built. Marcos didn't plant a seed, didn't water a root, didn't harvest a leaf of what you built. But he wanted half the harvest because one day, a long time ago, you shared the same roof. But building an empire isn't about sharing a roof, it's about sharing the fight. And those who fight with you, like Rosa, Mariana, Elena, the community, those are the ones who deserve part of the victory." Carolina wiped her face with the back of her hand and said, "That was exactly what the judge understood. And what happened at the final hearing was the most liberating moment of my life." The final hearing happened on a Thursday morning at the Queen's Courthouse, in a small room with beige walls and the smell of old paper. Carolina entered holding hands with Sophia, who had asked to miss school that day because she wanted to be there. Marcos arrived with his lawyer, gray suit, leather briefcase, that posture of someone who thinks they already won. The judge, an older gentleman with gray hair named Whitman, flipped through the file for 5 minutes in absolute silence before starting to speak. Carolina said her heart was beating so fast she was sure everyone in the room could hear it. The judge looked at Marcos first and said, "Mr. Torres, you claim you have a right to 50% of the business Carolina's Kitchen because it was constituted during the marriage. Correct?" Marcos confirmed. Then the judge continued, "And how did you contribute to the constitution of this business? Did you invest capital? Did you work in the operation? Did you buy equipment?" Marcos tried to argue that he contributed by giving emotional support in the first months, that the business idea came up in conversations they had together, that he always encouraged Carolina to cook. The judge interrupted. "Mr. Torres, emotional support is not social capital. Pillow talk is not a business plan, and encouragement is not work." Ms. Rodriguez, the defendant's lawyer, presented extensive documentation proving the business was initiated after you abandoned the marital home, that it was capitalized with money borrowed from third parties without your participation, that it was operated exclusively by Ms. Carolina without any involvement from you. Even more serious, you declared payment of child support on your tax return but never transferred the funds. That constitutes tax fraud and material abandonment of a minor. Marcos's face turned red. His lawyer tried to say something, but the judge raised his hand asking for silence. "I have been judging cases for 23 years, Judge Whitman continued with a firm voice. "And I have seen all kinds of situations, but rarely have I seen something as clear as this case. Mr. Torres, you abandoned your family in a moment of extreme vulnerability, did not pay support, did not contribute to the education, health, or sustenance of the children, disappeared for 2 years. And now that Ms. Carolina has built something valuable with her own work, you reappear wanting half. That is not a marital right, Mr. Torres. That is opportunism." Carolina said when she heard that, the tears fell uncontrollably. But they weren't tears of sadness. They were pure relief. The judge banged the gavel and declared, "Case dismissed. The business Carolina's Kitchen belongs entirely to Ms. Carolina Torres. Furthermore, Marcos Torres is ordered to pay retroactive child support for 24 months, with interest, under penalty of jail time, and I will forward a copy of this case to the IRS for investigation of tax fraud." Case closed. When they left the courthouse, Sophia hugged her mother tight and said, "Mom, you won. You really won." Carolina looked at her daughter and replied something she had been holding on to for months. "No, Sophia, I didn't win today. I had already won the day I decided not to give up. Today was just the confirmation." Elena, the lawyer, hugged both of them and said this was the kind of victory that made all the work worthwhile. Marcos left through the side door, head down, alone, defeated. Carolina looked at him one last time and felt no anger, felt no pity, felt nothing. He had become the past. She was the present and future now. That night, Carolina made a special dinner in her kitchen, gathered the 3 kids, Rosa, Mariana, Raj, Elena, and some closest customers. It wasn't a celebration of a legal victory. It was a celebration of a fresh start, of recovered dignity, of justice finally done. I parked the taxi at a red light and turned to the back seat with that feeling of someone who just heard a story that had to be told. "Carolina, you know what the best revenge against someone who abandoned you is? It isn't winning a lawsuit. It isn't seeing him pay retroactive support. It isn't the fraud being investigated. The best revenge is you prospering without him, proving he was never an essential piece, that you were always complete on your own, that he lost the privilege of being close to an extraordinary woman, and he will carry that for the rest of his life. The certainty that he gave up on you at the worst moment and lost the best." Carolina smiled, wiped her eyes and said, "And the craziest part is the story didn't end there. because what came next was so surprising that even I still have trouble believing it. 6 months after the court victory, Carolina finally managed to formalize the business completely. Business registration, health permit, quality certification, everything legal. With the paperwork regularized, she could expand operations. Raj improved the app, including a monthly subscription system where the customer paid a fixed amount and received 20 meals a month at a discount. The idea was an immediate success. 300 customers turned into 700 in 3 months. Revenue went from $12,000 a month to $40,000. Carolina rented an industrial kitchen in a warehouse in Queens, hired 4 more cooks besides Rosa and Mariana, bought professional equipment, and transformed an artisanal operation into a real company. But even with growth, she kept the heart of the business: the preference notebook, the personalized service, the quality that had won over the first customers. It was at that moment that something unexpected happened. An investor got in touch. David Chen, owner of a restaurant chain in Manhattan, had downloaded Carolina's app after his daughter, who lived in Queens, recommended it. He ordered 3 times, liked it so much he set up a meeting. "Carolina," he said in his office with a view of Times Square, "I have worked with food for 30 years. I own 8 restaurants, millions in revenue, but I have never seen anyone do what you do. Real homemade food with soul, scalable, at a fair price, with service that turns a customer into a fan. Have you ever thought about franchising?" Carolina replied honestly. "Mr. Chen, I barely managed to get here. Franchising seems like something from another planet." He smiled and said, "It was, but not anymore. Let me make you a proposal." David Chen's proposal was a partnership. He came in with $100,000 in capital, expertise in franchise management, and a network of contacts. In exchange, he kept 30% of the company. Carolina maintained majority control, continued as CEO, defined the menu and quality standards. Raj continued as CTO responsible for technology. Rosa and Mariana gained a 5% stake each. David handled expansion, operations, and finance. Carolina asked for 3 days to think, gathered everyone who had been with her since the beginning, and asked the honest question: "Do you guys think I'm ready for this?" Rosa replied, "Carolina, you were ready when you took that loan from Jennifer and made the first meal. You just didn't know it yet." She signed the contract a week later. In 2 years, Carolina's Kitchen opened 8 franchises in New York, 3 in New Jersey, 2 in Philadelphia. Each unit kept the model: local cooks, fresh ingredients, personalized service, integrated app, average revenue of $40,000 a month. The company started billing $2 million a year. Carolina moved out of the rental in Queens and bought her own apartment in Brooklyn, enrolled the 3 kids in private school, paid for Sophia's college, and even helped Rosa and Mariana open their own businesses. She was interviewed by the local Latino radio station, by an immigrant entrepreneurship magazine, and even by a TV show about small businesses that became big. But the moment she kept as most special wasn't any interview, any award, any revenue milestone. It was the day her middle son, Gabriel, 13 years old, came home from school and said, "Mom, the teacher asked us to write an essay about a hero. I wrote about you." When the taxi finally stopped in front of the address Carolina had given back at the start, a modern glass building in Brooklyn, I realized it wasn't a house. It was the headquarters of Carolina's Kitchen. She got out, paid for the ride with a generous tip, and before closing the door said, "Thank you for listening to my story. I know you are a taxi driver, not a therapist, but sometimes we need to tell someone, you know, to remember where we came from and give thanks for where we arrived." I smiled and replied, "Carolina, thank you for reminding me too that success isn't about being born in the right place. It's about not giving up in the wrong place. Good luck with everything." She waved and walked into the building. I stayed parked there for a few seconds, engine running, thinking about everything I had heard. A woman betrayed, abandoned, broke, without prospects, who could have crumbled, who could have gone back to Brazil defeated, who could have accepted any exploitative job just to survive. But she didn't do any of that. She took what she knew how to do best, cooking with love, and turned it into an empire. Not because she was a business genius, not because she had a management degree, not because she knew someone powerful. She won because she worked when everyone slept, because she treated the customer like a person, because she didn't give up when her ex-husband tried to destroy everything, because she trusted those who deserved trust and cut off those who deserved cutting. Carolina's story reminded me of something my father used to say when I was a kid. Son, a recipe for success has no secret ingredient. It has hard work, right timing, and the luck of finding good people along the way. But the main thing is not to stop stirring the pot, because food that nobody stirs burns. Carolina stirred her pot every single day for 5 years, and now she didn't cook alone in a cramped kitchen anymore. She commanded an operation that fed thousands of people and gave jobs to hundreds. And best of all, Marcos, the ex-husband who wanted half the empire, didn't get a dime. He was left only with the regret of having abandoned the woman who was worth gold while he treated her like copper. I started the taxi and headed to the next passenger, but I took with me the lesson Carolina taught me without knowing. Divorce isn't the end of the story, it's the start of a new chapter. And sometimes the new chapter is better than all the previous ones combined because you write it yourself, the way you always wanted, without anyone telling you that you aren't capable. Carolina was capable. And when you ask what happened to her after, the answer is simple and powerful. She became the owner of her own life. And that, my friend, is the truest happy ending there is. Now I ask you, how many times have you used lack of money, lack of time, lack of experience as an excuse not to start? How many pressure cookers, how many invisible talents do you have stored away waiting for someone to give you permission to use them? Carolina started with $50 and 10 meals. You have more than that right now. The difference between her and most people wasn't luck, it was the decision to start when everything seemed impossible. If this story touched you, if it made you rethink the value of what you know how to do, hit that like button right now and share it with someone who needs to hear that restarting has no age limit, no expiration date. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications because every week I bring real stories from my taxi that prove success isn't about being born in the right place. It's about not giving up in the wrong place. Comment fresh start. If you believe there is still time to turn your life around, see you on the next ride.